This channel is part of the History Hit network.
Chicago, Diana, Princess of Wales, does what she does best, flies the flag as Britain's most popular ambassador. Another American visit again proved her success in her public role. Privately, as the marriage partner for Prince Charles, she's been a disaster. 15 years ago, she seemed the ideal choice.
We all loved Diana, and we thought she was perfect, and we wished her on him. He knew he had to get married. He knew there was a lot of pressure on him to hurry up and make up his mind. And she was a sweet, adorable girl, and exactly the type that he'd always fancied. Gorgeous blonde with lovely long legs. It was easy to fall in love with Diana. It was easy to persuade yourself that she was perfect. She was perfect for anybody. The whole country was in love with her.
With hindsight, it's now obvious that Charles should have married a very different kind of woman, someone like the horsey, strong-minded Camilla Parker Bowles. Charles met her when they were both in their early 20s, but she became tired of waiting for him to make up his mind.
Charles knew Camilla and began his affair with her when he was in his dithering phase, really, his Hamlet phase. He came late to discovering that he was an ex officio sex symbol and that women were at his feet, and began to rather enjoy it in his mid to late 20s, in and out of the Navy, at a time when other people, certainly other princes of Wales, are thinking it's time to get married and start breeding children. He postponed it longer than any Prince of Wales for several hundred years by the time he actually finally got married in his early 30s. And I think that just was that he was playing the field while he had the chance. He knew he wasn't going to be king for a very long time.
The lineup of his girlfriends included Davina Sheffield, an accomplished horsewoman, the actress Susan George, the Duke of Wellington's daughter, Lady Jane Wellesley, and Sabrina Guinness, spirited member of the brewing family. He was most in love with Anna Wallis, who showed him a passion for life that he'd never previously known.
Charles was certainly infatuated by Anna Wallis. She's a very lively and high-spirited and very beautiful woman. She wasn't prepared to pay second fiddle to anyone, including the Prince of Wales, which made it, of course, very difficult for Charles to seriously contemplate getting engaged to Anna.
She was a mature girl, and she realised that Camilla Parker Bowles was not going to let go. She saw the way they danced together. She saw the attraction, and that was it.
Camilla fought off another rival for Charles's affections amongst his married friends.
He was known very well for a long time to be very close to Lady Dale Tryon, known as Kanga, who has a clothes shop called Kanga, that was his nickname for her, who reputedly, with Mrs. Parker Bowles, headed the committee of Charles's married women friends who chose Diana, ironically, as his bride because she was somebody too young to make much of a fuss if he strayed.
We know this from her brother-in-law, Richard Parker Bowles, who has said this, that she encouraged the match because she thought Diana would be easy to manipulate. I don't think you can ignore the words of her brother-in-law. He said that she was a wrecker. She couldn't bear to see other people happy.
By keeping Camilla as his mistress, Charles is following family tradition. His great-great-grandfather, King Edward VII, was a repeatedly unfaithful husband. He had to wait until he was 59 before his mother died and he could become king. Without a proper job, country pursuits and mistresses dominated his life.
His great-great-grandfather, King Edward VII, Victoria's son, when Prince of Wales, notoriously had many affairs and continued to after becoming king. This, of course, was in a different age when his wife did shut up and look the other way and was very long-suffering and kind enough to invite his favourite mistress to see him on his deathbed. And that favourite mistress, Mrs. Alice Keppel, just happens to be the great-grandmother of Mrs. Camilla Parker Bowles, as Camilla reputedly reminded the prince on one of their first meetings. My great-grandmother was your great-great-grandfather's mistress. How about it, then? She supposedly said to him. But of course he lives in a different age, a more intrusive media age, an age where Diana decided to become a feminist icon by stamping her foot and not looking the other way. And if he thinks there's a royal tradition of getting away with it, I'm afraid he's been rumbled.
In the early 90s, the media could still only speculate from afar on the goings-on behind palace walls. The hypocrisy of the United Family Front was exposed by two royal insiders.
Diana and Sarah have brought the 600mm Nikon lens right into the bedrooms of the royal family, and in some cases into the beds. I think it was good for all of us in many ways to have this family that was so high profile and behaved so badly in many, many cases. It's so good for all of us to be able to see that, because it's like a mirror in which we see ourselves. And Diana actually caused this to happen. Diana and Sarah Ferguson, between them, they put the royal family and family behaviour on the map. And for this we have to thank them.
The long history of royal infidelity stems from a recurring psychological problem.
The men in the royal families that have gone back over the generations have had one thing that goes right through all of them, a kind of pattern, and that is that they've not really particularly liked women. And the reason for this is that for the most part, certainly over the last 4 or 5 generations, their mothers have not really had time for them. So on the one hand, they're looking for the mother that they never had. So they're looking for one woman after another because they'll never find this mother anywhere. So they're searching. And on the other hand, there's a feeling of hostility within them, directed towards all women whom they scapegoat for what it was that their own mothers had not given them.
At the turn of the century, Queen Mary was a distant and overly strict mother to her 6 children by King George V. This laid the foundations for her eldest son David's liking for mature, married women, culminating in his infatuation with the twice-married Wallis Simpson. When his father died in 1936, the bachelor Prince of Wales succeeded him as King Edward VIII.
God save the King!
But behind the scenes, the new king's love affair was all-consuming. Wallis fascinated him.
For one thing, being an American, she wasn't really in awe of the king as much as a British woman would have been. She spoke her mind. She was a woman, a very confident woman of the world. She spoke to him as an equal. She wasn't as deferential as most people were. Certainly all those Debs that he met here were terrified of him. He didn't ever like young, unmarried girls that grew out. All his mistresses were women with husbands. That's what he liked. A confident woman, a bossy woman, a woman who knew her way around in the world. And the Duchess of Windsor, Wallis Simpson, was the supreme bossy woman all their life. She simply bossed him. She's a woman who had 2 husbands living and very self-confident. And this, I think, is what appealed to him more than anything. One hears stories that there was some kind of sexual allure. I think this is nonsense. You don't give up your throne for sex. I mean, you can have sex any time. If you're a king, you don't really have to give up your throne in order to have some kind of happy sexual relationship with a woman. It was something far deeper, far more important than simply a sexual trick or a sexual allure. What he wanted was a woman who would dominate him, and this is certainly what he got.
Once again, there's a married, now divorced woman romantically involved with a future king. History may be repeating itself.
Camilla is a latter-day Wallis Simpson. You know, you've got a rather dominant woman who stands out, different from the other girlfriends. You've got somebody who's rather masculine. There's a mannish jaw, mannish hands, and a very masculine voice. And there's a tendency to take over the home, like Wallis Simpson took over Fort Belvedere. Camilla has taken over Highgrove.
While Diana stayed in London, Highgrove became Camilla Parker Bowles' territory. Living just down the road, she's always been at his beck and call.
Also, there's the feeling that Camilla is the only person that's ever understood Charles, the only woman he's ever really, of his own age, that he's ever really been able to relate to in any way at all.
As a young man, Charles found kindred spirits in a much older generation. In particular, he found sympathy and encouragement in his great-uncle, Lord Louis Mountbatten. This forceful character filled the emotional gap left by his busy, absent parents from an early age, and he became both mentor and surrogate father to the sensitive, unconfident prince. Mountbatten was very concerned about the type of woman a Prince of Wales should marry. Charles reflected his teachings in a television interview when he was 20.
When you marry, in my position, you're going to marry somebody who perhaps one day is going to become queen. And you've got to choose somebody very carefully, I think, who could fulfill this particular role. Because people like you, perhaps, would expect quite a lot from somebody like that. And it's got to be somebody pretty special.
When Charles made that assessment, Diana Spencer was only 8 years old. Other members of the royal family, particularly the Queen Mother, were uneasy about Mountbatten's deep influence over the heir to the throne.
They were quite worried, I think, that Charles would perhaps become too involved with Mountbatten and some of his more peculiar friends. And the Queen Mother was always a counterbalance to Mountbatten's influence. The Queen Mother would be the soft feminine shoulder he could cry on, as he literally did. And Mountbatten, the man he could confide his love secrets in.
At Broadlands, his home in Hampshire, Mountbatten planned for the future of his family.
Mountbatten wanted Charles to marry his granddaughter, Amanda Latchbull, rather than Diana Spencer, who was the Queen Mother's candidate, because that would have been yet another step in cementing the Mountbatten dynasty.
His father had been disgraced and pushed out of office during World War I because he had all these German connections and the German family name. And so Earl Mountbatten devoted his life, I think, to repairing that damage and restoring the prestige of his family, and that would have been the ultimate for him, to have his granddaughter become Queen of England.
In 1979, Mountbatten was murdered by the IRA while on a family holiday in Ireland. For Charles, the loss had a devastating effect.
His great-uncle was a surrogate father for him. He loved Mountbatten, and I think Mountbatten loved him. And he was different from Philip in that he was much more understanding of Charles's needs. He wasn't so harsh, he wasn't so demanding of him. And I think Charles needed somebody like him, and when he died, it was a tremendous shock. It took him a while to get over that.
Mountbatten died in August 79, and at that time Charles had become involved with what the press called a mystic miss, an Indian lady with whom he formed an intense relationship.
There's a particular woman, an Indian woman, Zoe Salis, who was actually 10 years older than he was, and who had a child from the actor John Huston. And she was able to provide him with an enormous amount of comfort in a motherly sort of way, because she was in fact a mother herself. But not only from that point of view, but being an Indian woman, she also represented something more mystical for him. She was a sort of guru.
He continued to see Zoe Salis right up until certainly the summer of 1980, when he had already met and was starting to court Diana Spencer.
At 32, Charles was still clinging to Mountbatten's golden rule of safety in numbers when it came to women.
Mountbatten was on record as saying before Charles's marriage that he should play the field as much as possible, which of course Charles did in his 20s, being a bit of a late bloomer in that department, as in some others, which of course is why he missed the chance to marry Camilla Shand, now Camilla Parker Bowles, which may have altered his life in many ways.
Camilla married cavalry officer Andrew Parker Bowles in 1973, yet she remained the major emotional force in Charles's life. It seemed that she and Andrew had an understanding about Charles that suited them both. All she had to do was find him a compliant wife. With all his contemporaries married, the Prince of Wales now realised that he must find a future queen and do his duty of producing heirs. Enter Lady Diana Spencer, an innocent teenager who seemed to fit the bill.
A few days after her 19th birthday, she sat in a haystack with Charles and told him how much she sympathised with him over Mountbatten's death. And he was quite taken with this, he was quite charmed. But she was a kid, just a kid to him, just a child. She was an adolescent, she was a girl who'd hardly ever been abroad. She knew very little about life. She spent most of her time in London looking after young children. She was very unworldly. And she came from a dysfunctional family, and she was looking for love, she was looking for stability. She thought she would find it with Charles. But Charles at the time was thrown into emotional turmoil. He'd lost the man who was in some ways a father figure to him, was suffering grief, bereavement, and his own love life and emotional life were in a mess at the time.
And I'm amazed that she's been brave enough to take me on. And I suppose in love.
Of course.
Whatever in love means.
Whatever love meant to Charles, he looked far from at ease in the role of bridegroom, a victim of royal duty and his own indecision. Diana, swept up in the romance of it all, had no idea what had really been going on behind the scenes.
It was a plot, it was a scheme. They found Lady Diana Spencer fitted the identikit. And he was hastily pushed towards marriage. I mean, he was very uncertain himself, as he has said. He felt his father was pushing him, which is true, and also his mother was pushing him. And as it turns out, his mistress was pushing him. I think it was all very unfair because he wasn't ready to make that decision. They should have left him a couple of years after Mountbatten's death to make up his own mind and get to know Diana a little bit better and to make that decision properly and to leave her the opportunity to see if that was the man of her dreams.
Everyone expected them to live happily ever after, as in all the best fairy tales. In reality, they couldn't have been more ill-matched, and even Charles's choice of where to spend their wedding night was tainted by his relationship with Camilla. Broadlands was where Mountbatten had allowed his great-nephew to have his love affairs.
He worked out what we call a love plan. He decided that poor Prince Charles was too exposed to the press, and also he didn't like the idea of him having to conduct his romances in his mother's house. So Lord Mountbatten was very kind and he lent him Broadlands, mostly at weekends, which he could use as a little love nest. So he used to take his girlfriends there, and notably one Camilla Shand, who was there many a weekend in late '72.
Diana unwittingly joined the list of Charles's Broadland conquests. The truth came as a shock.
When Diana learnt that she was sleeping in a bed that Camilla may indeed once have slept in, this would have added to the kind of build-up of anger and angst and hostility, that she was a woman without a past, and she really wanted her husband to be without a past too.
As they continued their honeymoon aboard Britannia, Diana was already realising Camilla's emotional hold over Charles.
I think there's enough evidence that Charles was seeing Mrs. Parker Bowles before, during and after that wedding, including the week leading up to the wedding, and of course the keepsakes of her on the honeymoon falling out of his pockets and so on were the beginning of the end of the marriage as soon as it had begun.
But while on honeymoon at Balmoral, they seemed typically loving newlyweds.
They seemed besotted by each other. Certainly the prince was very, very devoted to his wife. I remember in 1983, on her very first tour abroad in Australia, 6 weeks they had in Australia and New Zealand, and he was so proud of her and the great triumph she had on that first trip. And he was constantly touching her, reassuring her, patting her hand. All the actions, we thought then, of a loving husband.
But once home, Charles slipped into old habits. He was unable to understand or cope with Diana, struggling under the pressures of her public role and Camilla's presence. In desperation, she turned for support to a man who was constantly at her side.
Barry Monarchy was Diana's bodyguard in the crucial years of 85 to 86, when Charles said that his marriage was irretrievably broken down. Various suggestions have been made that perhaps Diana and the bodyguard had an affair. What is pretty certain is that Charles was very jealous of Diana's closeness to her bodyguard, and that he discovered this closeness days before Fergie's wedding.
In the mid-80s, he sadly died when his motorbike he was riding through the city of London was in collision with a car.
It was at the Cannes Film Festival in 1987 that Diana learnt of Monarchy's sudden death. How she heard reveals the acrimonious nature of the Wales' marriage.
Charles was told that Monarchy had died. Diana did not know. They were going to a function that night. As the door was opened for Diana to get out, Charles leant across and said, "Oh, by the way, Monarchy is dead." It would have been kinder to have hit her.
The loss of this trusted confidant increased Diana's vulnerability. It was then that she started her most serious affair with the cavalry officer Major James Hewitt. Charles seemed to consider him a better choice than a policeman.
Well, Monarchy came from a fairly ordinary background, but Hewitt was in the officer class. One might say just, but he was in it. And he played polo. So he was one of the chaps. And the story is that Charles didn't really mind that Diana was seeing Hewitt, because Hewitt was taking this troublesome wife off his hands. But it was only when Hewitt started selling a few stories to the papers that Charles began to raise a few objections.
James Hewitt is now retired to a newly acquired property in the West Country. For Diana, his betrayal hurt.
I think Diana's quite clearly feels very let down by James Hewitt. I think she made that clear in the Panorama programme. She was honest enough to admit that she loved him, that they'd had an affair. He capitalised on it in that dreadful book written by Anna Pasternak, which subsequently became a dreadful film. But there's no doubt that Hewitt emerges as a pretty venal and unattractive figure from the level to which he's stooped to capitalise on what was a love affair, whoever it was with.
Other men in Diana's life included James Gilby, a car salesman and old friend from before her marriage. Their relationship was confirmed when tapes of a bugged telephone conversation between them became public. She also turned to art dealer Oliver Hoare for sympathy and attention. England's rugby captain Will Carling also offered his support before his own marriage broke down. So far, she hasn't chosen her men friends well.
I think Diana is in need of love. She's a woman with an enormous capacity for giving love and a capacity for receiving it, who's been denied it throughout her marriage and in many ways throughout her life. Let's not forget that her parents broke up when she was 6. Her mother rather unusually left, leaving her in the custody of her father, unusual for the day. She regards her life as a series of betrayals, and if she occasionally chooses the wrong man, I think that's because she's had a pretty tough life, and I think her real friends are worried that whenever a dashing subaltern does come along and sweep her off her feet, she may get swept away by another wrong-un.
Charles still seems to only have eyes for Camilla. The reason for their enduring relationship is the same as it's always been.
I think the basic attraction really was sex. She was a woman who used sex as a bait, a lure, and I think a controlling device with Charles. And he may think of her as a comfort cushion and the nanny and all the things that the press have said about her. But I think in the end, you've got to take the evidence of the Camilla Gate tape and the banter on that tape and the fact that they were making the next appointment for a tryst. You've got to take the eyewitness accounts, which the tabloid press has been full, and amusing as those tales often are, I mean, they do in the end boil down to a sexual relationship.
For the British monarchy, the lid is well and truly off Pandora's box of unhappy marriages and royal infidelities. There's no going back to a time when royal wives towed the line.
There's no doubt that Diana and Fergie have, between them in different ways, done enormous damage to the House of Windsor, wittingly or unwittingly. It's not them alone. Charles and Andrew must take responsibility, and Edward to some extent as well, the younger generation as a whole. But I think that the monarchy, by chewing up these girls and spitting them out and thinking they're rid of them with these divorces, is making a very big mistake, especially if it's not seen to treat them properly as ex-royals. Fergie's more of a liability than Diana, but I think between them they can continue to do damage to the House of Windsor from whatever distance for the rest of their lives.
Despite her divorce from Charles, Diana's power base as the people's royal favourite is still secure. But her adoring public could become a double-edged sword. Now free to marry again, in their eyes, what man could possibly make such an idolised woman happy? Rome, and the word is out that someone special is in town. The paparazzi spring into action, and Britain's most popular export receives a very Italian welcome. Diana's reputation as a fashion leader gives her a high profile in a country addicted to style. As guest of honor at a charity dinner and fashion show arranged by the Italian designer Crizia, Diana combines two of her main interests, charity work and clothes. Well aware of just how much the right outfit can help her good causes, after 15 years on the world stage, she's achieved legendary status as a crowd puller. London's Knightsbridge, home to one of Britain's top fashion designers, Jacques Azaguri has been designing for the Princess of Wales since the early 80s. Costing around £2,000, embroidered and beaded evening dresses are his speciality. Diana chose to wear one of these eye-catching creations on the night her revealing interview for Panorama was televised, and she knew all eyes would be on her. The dress was a statement.
The first time she wore it was the night of her now very famous interview. It was just basically saying, you know, this is me, I feel really confident, this is the way I look, and here I am. And she chose that dress, I think, really because it's a very stunning dress. It's very, very simple in line, but I think it says enough by the way, by the way it's cut. It had a very low neckline. It was quite bare. It was figure hugging. Just looked great on the princess.
A few weeks later, she wore the same dress to receive a humanitarian award in New York. Its low-cut style with made-to-measure bodice uplifting her 36B figure again caused a sensation.
It's a very fashionable look at the moment. The low, all the supermodels are wearing it, and it's a statement of the moment to have that very low cleavage and the straps. It's not just because she's Princess Diana and she's going to be in front of 100 men. It's just a fashion statement, I would say, as opposed to anything else. She has a great confidence about her. It's like, here I am, I'm feeling great, I'm looking great, and it all comes through the clothes, and you can see through the choice of clothing that she's choosing these days. That's exactly what she's portraying and obviously feeling inside herself.
Visiting Venice in 1995, Diana dared to show more leg in another Azaguri dress.
I'd say she's very adventurous. For instance, the red dress that we made for her for Venice, was covered worldwide, and the news was how short her skirt was. And it was very, very short by princess standards. But she actually, that's how she wanted to wear it, and that's the way she did wear it. And of course, it looked great that way. It was a red hand-beaded fabric. It was a bugle bead, which has a great weight to it. It hangs very well. And that's basically why we needed to do such a simple shape, because the fabric was enough in itself, and with the princess in it, you didn't really need any more.
More of the Guggenheim. But you want to come through.
Azaguri has been dressing Britain's rich and famous for more than 10 years, but Diana's patronage has taken his business worldwide. He's well aware of her power.
She's chosen one of my dresses for that function. It is very exciting when you think she has the whole world at her feet. For myself, it's really opened up many doors in many countries, and particularly in the States and in Europe. By the princess wearing one of my dresses, it has actually made my name known to people who would never otherwise have heard of my name.
It was in Florence in 1985 that Diana first wore one of Azaguri's designs for a public occasion. On this, her first visit to Italy, the striking velvet and organza evening dress signposted a growing sophistication in her fashion sense. A young, unworldly princess was coming of age.
I think that was her first move towards something slightly more tailored and something, I would say, slightly more international on the fashion level. At the same time that she was wearing that, she was still wearing that sort of very full ball gown, the frilly off the shoulders. She's gone from a very young Diana that used to wear clothes that would shroud her body and actually cover her body, to now where she's probably one of the most sophisticated, beautiful women in the world, wearing much more fitted clothes, much more revealing clothes, which actually kind of project a much more confident Diana than of 10 years ago.
Back then, the new, uncertain Princess of Wales almost came unstuck during her first official evening function. Someone should have warned Diana that such an unstructured, low-cut evening dress would create problems. But by then, it was too late. She would have to learn the hard way, as the press had already homed in.
They love that, don't they? Seeing a bit of something they shouldn't see. That I think people think about that, especially someone who's been once burnt, like by getting out of a car and then their picture's all over whatever newspaper.
High cameras were able to expose a very unroyal amount of cleavage. It was a lesson Diana never forgot. Anyone in the limelight must dress with the utmost care.
The next time when they're going for a dress, they will, hopefully, I mean, they've got to be stupid if they don't think about it the second time around, but I think they would say, oh, well, let me see what it's like to get up and out.
Yet when she first started, Diana's main worry was that the sloppy jumpers of a kindergarten teacher were useless. For her new public role, she had to build a wardrobe from scratch. Her county set background showed in her choices.
Well, there were two influences, I guess. One was obviously the circle of friends that she mixed in, and the other was actually what was fashionable at the time. That sort of set that she moved in was very much into sort of neck things, you know, frilly hair and little kind of cravat things, and rather sort of... we hadn't hit the suits yet, because the rest of the very high fashion world was in amongst the Japanese at this point. We were all wearing black with sort of, you know, things, holes pulled out of it and so on and so forth. It would have been totally unsuitable for the Princess of Wales. She obviously then started to look at what she actually did look like, and she felt, well, maybe I could, you know, have a bit more neck showing and so on and so forth. So nowadays, when she absolutely, I mean, she doesn't, you know, she's just so confident that it doesn't make any difference. So the difference is extraordinary from that, you know, sort of chin down with was clothed, and now it's sort of wonderfully, and sort of she just feels comfortable in anything she wears.
By the mid-80s, Diana's more mature, uncluttered style was already established. She'd become the ultimate fashion icon, intent on promoting British designers. Bruce Oldfield helped her develop a new evening look.
Bruce was the first person, I think, really to introduce her to a kind of swathed, more sort of glamorous, film starry sort of look. I mean, she did have those dresses before, but they were much more the sort of bustier with the big skirt. And Bruce tended to make them kind of slinky and rather wonderful and sort of gathered and with a kind of thing here. So I think he freed her and made her aware that she could perhaps, you know, be a bit more shapely with the evening clothes rather than just wear the classic hunting, shooting, fishing ball dress that you tend to get. So I think he probably pushed her in that direction quite fast.
Diana resurrected the British millinery industry when hats became an integral part of her look.
She wears them so beautifully now, and I think in the early stages she wore them in the way English women wear hats to weddings, plonked on the head with the veil pulled over, or the fluff, the feather. And she, in very, very, very fast, we found her wearing them where they should be worn, which is across here. I mean, despite the fact that the photographers probably couldn't get into the eyes or couldn't see anything, but she really, almost immediately, maybe 2 years into being the Princess of Wales and having to wear a lot of hats, she suddenly realised she had to wear them the way they should be worn. Because she has great shoulders and terrific posture, she looks marvellous with those, you know, very broad hats. And once you wear those hats, you actually begin to like wearing them. She really does look like, you know, she could be a Vogue cover wearing those hats. Because she wears them properly, and she wears them with the right outfits, which is terribly important.
The right outfit costs money. From her engagement in 1981, Diana's clothes are estimated to have cost over £10,000 a month, totalling over £1 million during a 9-year period. Now, with the higher cost of clothes, that's increased to £1.25 million for her present wardrobe. All this doesn't include what she spends on maintaining a model's figure.
Now, for a silhouette, a narrow silhouette, you need to be slim. And so, of course, she had to work at slimming down. So there's been the swimming at Buckingham Palace in that pool. She's done that very religiously, swum a tremendous amount. The gym, she now has a personal trainer coming to her the whole time. She spends a very great deal of money, if you like to look at it in financial terms, on the infrastructure. That's what I'd call it. We're not talking about the makeup here, although she's been wearing increasingly quite a lot of makeup. But we're not talking about cosmetics. We're talking about the foundations here.
Charles's private income from the Duchy of Cornwall bankrolled her image building. This witty Catherine Walker suit would have cost around £2,500.
The way she can wear those dinner suits, she wore this one with what's called a trompe-l'oeil. It's a kind of fake waistcoat at the front, fake vest. And it was so trim and neat and very smart, and yet at the same time it's sort of funny. It's a take on menswear. It's also a joke on those stuffed shirts that British men have to wear on official occasions. It's a tremendous fun outfit, her looking at her best.
Knowing she looks her best has given Diana increased confidence.
Have you noticed with Diana how her skirt, her hemline and her shoe heels have gone up now that she feels more independent and better about herself? Those Jimmy shoes she wore, a young British designer who makes lively shoes, quite expensive. They cost £250, nearly $500 a pair. But they give Diana the right kind of look. Slightly sexy, isn't it? And something that makes her look like an independent young woman.
The key to Diana's rise as a fashion icon is her relationship with the shy and reclusive designer Catherine Walker. French-born and, like Diana, 5 foot 10 inches tall, she's the only designer not to have gone out of favour in 15 years.
The Princess of Wales, once she was married, realised that she was going to get so much attention, she needed to perhaps be guided, and I think she turned to the editor of Vogue for some advice as to who she could go to. And Catherine Walker's name came up, and that's how it all began.
By 1989, Diana's Catherine Walker streamlined look was firmly established, but this beaded evening gown for a visit to Hong Kong was a new high. At around £5,000, Diana had supreme comfort and elegance.
One thing that Catherine always manages to do is to disguise the intricacy of the tailoring. And when you put it on, something to do with the lining, which invariably is wonderful soft silk satin, it feels like it won't move. You have total confidence when you wear something. And it's like a work of art. It's like a sculpture in itself. You actually get terribly excited about wearing it for the first time. This will, whatever mood she might be in, however depressed she might be, however exhausted she might be, she puts that gown on. She has the high collar. She looks distinguished, almost all, without having to add any jewellery and have her hair done and her makeup.
Another foreign tour success was India in 1992. Again, Catherine Walker came up with something unexpected, elegant and utterly appropriate. Her meticulous research and attention to detail is renowned.
Catherine absorbs the environment, the surroundings. She will probably have looked at pictures and books of India and the places that the princess was likely to visit and designed outfits that would actually not clash, but that would somehow blend and enhance the surroundings and the settings. And there's no doubt that India is a very exotic place. It's full of colour. There is a sense of willowy glamour. It's colour, but it's simple. And if you look at the architecture behind her, there's an immense detail. It's very detailed and, if you like, jewel encrusted. That's the feeling you get from the Taj Mahal. If you look at the princess sitting there in all simplicity, she's wearing 3 colours, which is quite difficult. I mean, you wouldn't normally put an outfit together with 3 blocks of colour. But in this instance, it works because you're surrounded by detail, and therefore she looks perfect.
On a visit to Pakistan without Charles, Diana made an impact as a royal ambassador in her own right. As usual, for this official tour, the Foreign Office and taxpayer footed the bill, which included this Catherine Walker evening dress costing around £2,500. Diana carried it off to perfection.
I think she has a very strong sense of self. She's developed it over the years with Catherine's help, I think, as well. She would probably have known that she's going to a country where a lot of people may not have seen a princess in real life before, and therefore she's enhancing that image. I think if ever there was a dream princess in people's minds, it has to be Princess Diana, and that is the dress that you would want to be seen in. It's light, it's pale pink, and it's romantic. It's every little girl's dream.
Diana's wardrobe is now vast. When stored, her dresses span the width of 10 average terraced houses, and she has a 7-foot rack just for white blouses. But she does revamp and recycle. Here, the dress worn in Pakistan is seen again at a royal variety performance.
She's been known to wear the same outfits to a wedding and a function. I don't think she has a problem with that, as long as she knows that she feels comfortable and elegant. I think really what matters is wearing an outfit that is designed to give you maximum confidence so that you're never aware even of a shifting waistline or a shoulder that's slightly off or a split at the back that reveals too much. And that really comes down to the tailoring. That's the secret.
On her wedding day, Diana's dress did not live up to these exacting standards of design, but in all the euphoria surrounding the occasion, few noticed. Optimism about this fairy tale princess marrying her Prince Charming was rife, as 700 million people watched what was billed as the wedding of the century.
Lady Diana Spencer's wedding day was really extraordinary in that never, I think, kind of the anticipation been so great, the pressure. I mean, the people were crowded round television sets, even if they weren't in the streets at the time. And everybody wanted to know what this girl, and she was a girl, she was extremely shy, extremely nervous, extremely young. We wanted to know what she was going to wear. And so it was a kind of extraordinary event of this young girl getting out of this carriage, and the dress kept on coming. I mean, the train kept on coming. One was absolutely amazed.
The silk taffeta dress with its 25-foot train was designed by David and Elizabeth Emanuel. It was not a success.
I was sitting immediately behind the royal family, and I remember looking down the aisle as she came through the door and sort of gathered herself with her bridesmaids and so on. And, I mean, everybody was rushing round in panic because this dress was completely crumpled like a piece of tissue paper. It looked as if it had never been ironed. It got fantastically crushed in the carriage, which was a problem that nobody had anticipated. And that must have been really, well, horrid for her in a way on this very, very special day with all these other pressures.
Diana seemed unconcerned on her way back to the reception at Buckingham Palace, but she still had to contend with further dress problems. An open carriage is not an ideal way of transporting a large wedding dress with a train.
Most of them are very itchy on the inside too, and then you're squashed in this carriage and then you're trying to get out, and then if the fabric's not coming, I'm surprised she didn't just rip it off. And why they didn't give her a detachable train that then she could take off when she's finished walking up the aisle, which the majority of wedding dresses that we shoot are and do have detachable trains. Why they didn't do that seemed kind of cruel. It was a bit as if she was badly advised, and as if people thought, yes, you're so young that we will stick you in this dress that really a little girl would look very cute going to a party in, stick a long train onto it, and then send you down a red rug. I wonder actually how much say she had in it, whether she was completely bulldozed into something that was appropriate and very classic, and this is what you're supposed to wear, and she, said okay. But my personal theory is that Camilla took her shopping for a wedding dress anyway and chose the one that would look most horrible on her.
4 years later, in 1985, Diana and Charles were in Italy for an official tour. It was a huge success, with the Italians turning out in their thousands. Public perception of them as the golden fairy tale couple was still unsullied. But in reality, the fact that the crowds were always more interested in seeing a glamorous princess than a middle-aged prince was rubbing salt in the wound of Charles's dented ego and adding to their estrangement behind the scenes. Their happy double act was a sham. They were merely playing roles for the sake of their audience. Charles, used to centre stage, couldn't cope with the constant adulation of his wife. It set the seal on an already rocky marriage.
When Diana came along, she usurped Prince Charles in terms of popularity. The public turned out to see her, not to see him, and he was deeply irritated by this. He was offended, he would complain about it. He was, I think, actually at the bottom of his heart, very angry about it.
Charles found his thunder stolen yet again on the night his television profile was aired in June 1994. Despite admitting his adultery, it was Diana who got most front-page coverage. She chose that particular night to arrive at the Serpentine Gallery in a stunning outfit by Christina Stambolian, an off-the-peg impulse buy which had lain hidden in her private wardrobe for 3 years. Diana knew exactly what she was doing.
You can guarantee that if there is some grand royal occasion, that the day before, Diana will do something which guarantees the headlines. It happens every time, and once will be a coincidence, but after 10 or 12 years of it, it's by design. She knows exactly what she's doing. She is deliberately upstaging Prince Charles, her husband.
But as Princess Margaret, Lord Snowdon and their daughter Sarah arrived for the family wedding of Lord David Linley, they needn't have had any fears that Diana would try and upstage the bride. Diana knew exactly what was appropriate. Catherine Walker supplied an outfit of understated elegance.
She turned up wearing a kind of dove blue jacket and cream skirt and cream and dove blue hat. I mean, it was a very quiet color. I mean, she could have, I suppose, come more quiet and soft yellow or something, but the blue looks very beautiful on her with her eyes, and still it was very subdued And I don't think it was inappropriate or drew attention away from the bride whatsoever. It's a completely correct outfit for a wedding.
In contrast, the actress Raquel Welch wasn't so thoughtful.
She showed up to her son's wedding and completely drew attention away from her daughter-in-law-to-be because she wore an incredibly wide-brimmed hat and this very tight, sexy skirt, and no one was looking at the bride because everyone was looking at her, and she was loving it. So glad she's not my mom.
Diana now faces life as the first divorced Princess of Wales in history, a semi-detached royal, mother to a future king, but stripped of her Royal Highness standing. In her Panorama interview, she stated that she wanted to forge a new, useful role as a world ambassador for Britain, like her visit to Nepal for the Red Cross. To do that, she knows that where her clothes once attracted the media, her work must now catch the headlines. By sticking to simple classics, she's already doing that.
She needs to feel that people are going to take her seriously, first of all. She's there to carry out a job, be it as a carer visiting a hospital or somebody walking around. She is here on business. She needs to feel that nothing is going to detract from that. Even though she needs to create an impact, nothing must detract from the job that she's doing. She doesn't want to be seen as a fashion victim, clearly. She is a trendsetter. She has a lot to live up to. She's set a lot of precedents and some real showstoppers along the way, but she never would want to be seen as somebody who was falling victim to everybody else's influence. She has to be there, if you like, ahead of the pack and keep classical. And I think her role and the regal side to her job actually keeps that in check.
Something else that will keep extravagance in check will be her reduced income as the ex-wife of Prince Charles. The divorce settlement of around £17 million will give her the apparently huge income of £500,000 a year, but when compared to the annual £1.25 million she used to receive from Charles's Duchy of Cornwall funds, she's taken a big cut. From now on, she'll have to watch what she spends and perhaps buy more off the peg, even if it is a Jackie Kennedy-style suit by Versace, costing around £2,500. However she spends her money, Diana will continue to attract the world's attention wherever she goes.
She is a superstar, and wherever she goes, people want to see her, and governments will welcome her. They will lay on banquets for her. They will create, if you like, state occasions around her. And maybe we won't see what the press have thrived on in the last few years, which is the war of the Waleses. They will actually come to see that she has a role to fulfill, which is quite separate from that of the Prince of Wales. But at the same time, there will be no fighting, there will be no infighting. In fact, if you like, it will be splitting the two, and maybe it's a great service to this country and she can still go on being an ambassadress abroad.
A royal party on holiday in the Caribbean. The Princess of Wales is a frequent visitor to exclusive holiday spots. Enjoying the good life is one of the perks of being royal, and both Diana and Sarah have taken full advantage. The Duchess of York once spent 5 weeks in 1 year on the slopes. Both rejected the traditional royal pursuits of hunting, shooting and fishing. These young royal wives wanted to enjoy the playgrounds of the jet set, and they've schooled their children in expensive tastes. Princesses don't have to queue for fairground rides or jostle for space in crowded resorts and public swimming pools. The Duchess has been able to indulge her love of riding with access to the best horses money can buy. While as a gesture towards her husband's work, she took flying lessons, which only inspired her to write money-making children's books about a helicopter called Budgie. There's no doubt that Sarah is an expert skier, but with at least 2 winter holidays a year, she's had plenty of practice. She certainly outclasses Diana. In 1988, the royal party was staying in the exclusive Swiss resort of Klosters at the 5-star Walserhof Hotel. The total cost for a week of the royal foursome's holiday was in the region of £12,000. No discount package holidays here. Charles's obsession was skiing rival Sarah's, and originally he welcomed her enthusiasm for frequent skiing holidays. Not surprisingly, she was only too eager to enjoy the exclusive benefits of Europe's top resorts at royal expense. But despite all the advantages of five-star travel, she and Diana still couldn't maintain royal decorum. At this point, Diana kept her problems with bulimia well hidden. She looked the epitome of health and beauty, but she's always worked hard at her public image.
She spends a great deal of money and effort on grooming herself and looking good. You know, not all of these things come so naturally. Remember those early days with the tiara at the wedding when her hair in that long fringe flopped over her face? She learned on the job, and she learned absolutely brilliantly how to present herself.
Off-duty, Diana has used her clothes to express a surprisingly rebellious streak.
You've got to remember with Diana that she had her teenage years snatched away from her, with this being engaged at 19 and then really having her first child at 20. And so there's a bit in her, I think, that wants to lead that slightly wild teenage side in fashion terms. Look at when she ran off to Spain with her 3 girlfriends. Really a very teenagery, silly thing to do. Most of us didn't do that, going off to Marbella or going off holiday camps when we're very young. And those clothes for Diana mean the jeans, the t-shirts, the baseball caps, the cowboy boots, all those things that are a bit wacky really for a young woman of 30.
Diana's pursuit of a stylish image has always taken a back seat when she's with William and Harry.
When the children were younger and she went to these things like Sports Day, something every parent knows about, that she didn't want to stand out as the glamour princess wearing the short skirt showing off her great legs and looking like Princess Di. She wanted to be just a mum. And so she would then put on things that were absolutely typical of mothers of her class and type in England, rather a big baggy sweater usually or an oversized jacket and a long pleated skirt. So that was another facet of Diana. That was Diana the mother.
Building a glamorous image from the ground up, she spends around £7,000 a year on tights and underwear alone.
She likes very pretty lingerie from people like La Perla in Italy. She also likes very fresh cotton undies from Ralph Lauren. She buys them, and from even from Marks and Spencer. But she buys a lot of underwear. There's a lot that goes in that you don't see on camera to making that wonderful exterior.
Being able to escape on exotic holidays also helps Diana to keep looking good. Who wouldn't benefit from staying at a secluded Caribbean hideaway on the island of Nevis? In January 1992, while Britain was in the depths of winter, she spent a week recharging her batteries in the hot Caribbean sun and indulging her great love for swimming to maintain the body beautiful. Every morning, wherever she is, Diana insists on taking a dip. On an official visit to Egypt in May 1992, she thought she'd found a secluded pool away from a prying press. At home, she's used Buckingham Palace's private pool or the Chelsea Harbour Club, the exclusive sports facility in West London. Here, it costs in excess of £3,000 just to join. Diana's daily workouts keep her in trim, but she hasn't always had the well-exercised figure of a top model.
We knew, fashion people, that Diana had this magic, but I don't think the public realised right from the start. After all, there was a lot of puppy fat around before she slimmed down. Now we know, sadly, that was really because of anorexia and bulimia and problems about her weight. But what people saw at the beginning, those pictures on the palace lawn when the Queen was peeping out of the window, was a slightly dumpy-looking English girl with a very sweet smile and a long blonde fringe and definitely a slightly full figure and a big bosom, not helped by an electric blue suit with a narrow belt at the waist. It was after she learned how to present herself that she became both the greatest asset of the royal family in terms of her visual style and her fashion and the wonderful way she looked, and also a problem in that she did in a way show up what looked rather fusty side of the royal family.
Diana enjoyed spending Charles's annual £4 million profit from the Duchy of Cornwall. She spent it on herself, but also tried to liven up his image.
He actually said that she would make him younger. Of course, she didn't. He was born middle-aged, Prince Charles. The generation gap, the 12, 13-year gap between them never lessened. In fact, it's got wider. Nothing happened to make him younger. She tried very hard, certainly with his style, for example. She made him wear loafers. She made him wear different types of suits, different shirts and ties. But even though she bought him a pair of designer jeans, he's never once worn them. He boasts that he's never even tried them on, and he never ever will.
Don't you think it's funny the way that Diana tried to change Charles when she first married him? Oh, doesn't that ring a chord with all young wives, young brides who think that they're going to smarten their husband up? His valet, you know, was furious because that was the great role he had played, you know, the gay valet who'd gone out and had a great time in London's Jermyn Street, fingering all the shirts and choosing the sweaters and thinking that, you know, the Prince, His Royal Highness, looked so lovely in yellow. Well, Diana changed all that. She wanted him to have a younger, slightly sportier image. She bought him sweaters, certainly. You know, she did it later for James Hewitt. She likes the idea of dressing a man and making him look good. And the great thing was she tried to change Charles's shoes. That was the first great bone of contention. Now, Charles's shoes are things that you can wear walking over the moors. You know, they're great hefty shoes. He has them handmade. And she looked at her brother, Diana looked at her brother Charles, who's quite well dressed in that young aristocrat Brit way. And so she got Charles these sort of loafers, little moccasins, that didn't stand up 5 minutes of Charles striding around in the country at Highgrove and walking in the garden. He abandoned those almost immediately, and I think that's maybe when she started giving up hope that she was ever going to be able to change her man.
Highgrove, Charles's 700-acre estate in Gloucestershire, is where he can indulge his passion for gardening. Access to the beautiful landscapes of other royal estates, such as Sandringham and Norfolk, also offers him the very best painting opportunities. Abroad, his favourite place to paint is Tuscany in Italy, and in 1985 he exhibited his watercolours publicly for the first time in Raphael's house in Urbino. Charles's teacher was Sir Hugh Casson, one of Britain's foremost painters. This was the fulfilment of a schoolboy's dream.
When we were at school together, Charles did art, and he was very enthusiastic about art, and he was inspired by the art master, whose name was Waddell, and who helped develop his sense of beauty, at least on a superficial level. And Tuscany, where Prince Charles goes, is a very beautiful place, and he knows the rudiments of drawing and painting. And he's done it, I think, primarily for his own peace of mind and his own pleasure. But of course it's turned into something of a commercial venture now.
On a visit to Venice in April 1985, Charles spent every spare moment on the deck of the Royal Yacht Britannia painting. Alone with his thoughts and paints, he was in his element. Meanwhile, at the other end of the ship, his bored wife wandered neglected. Both seemed oblivious to each other, wrapped up in their own worlds. Diana has certainly been attracted by the material benefits of being royal, such as access to luxury sports cars. Suppliers fall over themselves to give the royal family top-of-the-range models at massive discounts, knowing the huge publicity benefits. After Diana started driving an Audi sports car, sales doubled, boosting the company's profits to £10 million. Living in Kensington Palace with a full staff of servants, Diana obviously has no mortgage worries. Shopping in nearby Knightsbridge fills much of her spare time. Haute couture doesn't come cheap. This is where the truly rich come to shop and where price tags aren't required. Diana is estimated to spend in the region of £100,000 a year on clothes, including £10,000 on shoes alone. She's renowned for her style and good taste, but it certainly helped having an almost limitless budget.
We are talking about a very wealthy young woman. She was brought up with money and to money. You know, she's never wanted for a few cents, a few bob in her life. So she's always had money to spend on herself, and she spends a lot on keeping herself looking good. And why shouldn't she? After all, people of her class and type, certainly princesses throughout history, have spent a lot of money on their appearance. Perhaps she got too preoccupied at one stage with the outer exterior, but it's probably because she was so terribly unhappy inside. And we know the syndrome, don't we? All of us women, I'm not so sure about men, of going out and buying something new because you're feeling rotten about yourself.
Charles gets rid of his frustrations by playing polo. This is a sport for the very rich. Players have to keep at least 8 ponies, costing at around £160,000 a year. Charles took up polo as a teenager to follow the macho image of his father, Prince Philip. Despite being an elitist sport, it has at least allowed him to get a taste for some rough and tumble.
Polo was the nearest thing that Prince Charles could have to taking part in a body contact sport. When he was at school and at university, he was not allowed to play rugby because it was felt undignified for ordinary people to come into physical contact with the heir to the throne and perhaps hurt him. But when he became an adult, he took up polo because he thought it was a pretty tough thing to do.
He's always, to some extent, taken physical risks at the expense of intellectual ones. Polo's been a great pressure cooker, steam valve, letting off steam for him, an escape from all the tedious pressures of his life. And over the years I've watched him, which is a long time now, nearly 20 years, I've seen him become more and more conservative in his approach to his charities, the way he uses his job and so on, and take those kind of risks on the ski slopes or the polo field instead. I think that's its function in his life.
Ever since a childhood riding accident, Diana has disliked horses. Like other polo wives, she grew tired of always having to take second place to a 4-legged obsession.
I think that, in a way, they would probably not get a very good deal. I know that most polo players are very angry with me when I say this, but any young boy that's grown up madly in love with his horse and so attached to his horse, one has to be a little bit concerned about what his motives are, because the horse often takes over the role of father for a child whose father's not been available, because the horse is very sturdy, it's very powerful, it's very upright, it's very thrusting, it's very phallic. So I think any girl that follows the polo players around and hopes that one day she will find some wonderful man to love her may find that he's not quite as wonderful as she thinks.
Despite all this, women have always been fascinated by the rich macho world of polo. Charles had the added attraction of being a royal prince with the press nickname of Action Man.
Certainly there are many stories, predating his marriage, I should hastily add, of polo groupies and various toff-type friends who set up polo teams, polo weekends abroad, where I think girls were very much part of the scene.
Behind the smiles, Diana soon realised that Charles was never going to change his horsey ways to suit her. He would continue to always have more time for his riding chums, like his polo manager, Major Ronald Ferguson, than for a self-centred, discontented wife. Perhaps Charles should have married Major Ron's youngest daughter, Sarah, who had grown up in the world of polo and loved horses. Ironically, she married Andrew, the only royal who has no interest in equestrian pursuits at all. But to begin with, her polo connection stood her in good stead.
I think when Fergie got together with Andrew, it didn't do any harm that Philip and Charles already knew Major Ron, who was Charles's polo manager and had been a knockabout polo buddy of Philip's for many years.
Sarah was seen as a chip off the old block and has always been close to her father and the fast-living world of polo. She loyally stood by him when the newspapers exposed his carelessly open visits to a massage parlour in London's West End. In the light of this scandal, his many years as deputy chairman of the Guards Polo Club was abruptly terminated in September 1988. For the 57-year-old father of a royal duchess, it was a humiliating rejection. Yet Charles still kept him on as his polo manager.
There were stories that Major Ron knew a thing or two about what had happened in sundry locker rooms around the land, post-polo type activities, that it was quite nice to have him on the inside rather than the outside, because he's always been a bit of an unguided missile, Major Ron, and remains so. So I think that helped Fergie's cause when Andrew was wondering whether or not to marry her, that her dad was already known to the royals.
Perhaps this should have warned Andrew that Sarah was already part of the freewheeling spirit of the polo world, which would ultimately contribute to their marriage breakdown. But on their wedding day in 1986, such a scandal was unimaginable. Here was a new Duchess who would tame the Queen's favourite playboy son. Sarah seemed to have the same strong-minded qualities of the previous Duchess of York, Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, who in 1923 married the future King George VI. 63 years later, Sarah seemed to have everything to look forward to.
I think she felt very confident of her position in the royal family, of her husband-to-be. She'd just been made a duchess that morning, which is an awfully nice start. She's had a lot of flack, I know, and criticism about her figure and her clothes sense, but the interesting thing about her wedding dress was it was the one dress that really mattered, and it really got it right. I remember sitting around a television set with everybody at Vogue House, and the gasp factor, which I always measure quite highly, which is when a bride gets out of the car, or the coach in this case, was enormous, because she actually looked wonderful. The dress was a triumph. She never looked so good, and that's in a way what you want every bride to be able to say, whoever they are.
The price tag for this fashion success was in the region of £30,000. It was created in the workshops of the then little-known fashion designer Linka Chirac, and since then her business has never looked back. It's not every day that you get both a royal wedding dress commission and a client that thinks the sky's the limit cost-wise. Sarah had never before had access to the very best of everything, and on her wedding day she started as she meant to go on. Linka Chirac remembers how she became involved in Sarah's first major spending spree.
I think the reason I got the commission was because I was fairly unknown and she liked to sort of go for something different. And also I'd done many of the wedding dresses that were in the social calendar, and so she had an opportunity to see my work prior to actually me starting for her.
Linka Chirac was there to help Sarah on the day, and no expense was spared in getting the dress exactly right.
The beading took approximately 3 months to do. First of all, I had to design the beadwork with my main beader, Daphne, who was absolutely wonderful. We sat for hours trying to work out what bead went where. Once that was organised, then we had to buy all the beads, and we had something like over 150,000 beads. They were all slightly dyed because the colour of the cloth is a very pale ivory, and we wanted a warm colour to come through on the dress.
Sarah had now got a taste for the luxury of made-to-measure perfection. From then on, it was haute couture all the way. Linka Chirac continued to design for her, including this outfit for a Canadian tour. But the new Duchess was soon using other designers. Money can't buy you taste, however, and she was pilloried by the press for her lack of fashion sense. She turned for help to the Danish-born designer Isabel Christensen, attracted by her ability to create outfits that cause a stir. She was the centre of attention recently at Royal Ascot. Her clients include Tina Turner, Shirley Bassey and Cher. In 1 year alone, Sarah spent £50,000 on Isabel's creations. Her spending had begun to get out of control. One ball gown resulted in the unfortunate newspaper headline of "Frock Horror."
Well, I chose this dress for her to wear, or I suggested this dress for her to wear in Puerto Rico because it's a light fabric, it's a short organza. It's a lovely colour for her, especially for her skin colour and her hair. It's a boned bodice, so it shows off your waist very well, it shows off your shoulders. It's got a very pretty neckline and a little sleeve, so it's not strapless, you don't feel too bare, even if you're sitting for dinner. And it has an A-line skirt, which is very good because it's quite big, but still you can move around elegantly and even dance easy.
And how much did this cost in pounds sterling?
This is 3,800.
During their time, the young wives of Windsor brought a sense of style and glamour to the rigid face of royalty. For a few heady years, the two young women propelled the British monarchy into the exposed realms of the jet set and spent a lot of money in the process. Now, what does the future hold?
Diana will have to behave, and I think will anyway behave more respectably, let's say, than Fergie. Diana's very well aware that the Princess of Wales anyway outranked the Duchess of York, but also she's always going to be the mother of future kings. or future king, possibly plural, and therefore will behave with a certain more decorum. She'll continue to live in a royal palace. She'll be seen with the royal family on certain occasions, which Fergie won't anymore. So I think they will be very different kettles of fish.
Sarah now has to clear her £3 million debt, but it won't stop her enjoying herself.
I think Fergie's a kind of Frankenstein's monster that the royal family have created. If they think that as an ex-royal, an ex-HRH, whatever antics she gets up to won't reflect badly on the House of Windsor anymore, I think they've got another thing coming there. I think her and Diana, for the rest of their lives, will be potential embarrassments, potential liabilities because of their connections to the royal family. Fergie in America certainly can continue to make lots of money. The HRH there, people don't really understand its significance. She is a great commercial draw, sponsorship, modeling, even that kind of thing. She's got very expert, top-of-the-range advice now, expert advisors, and yes, I think she can pull in millions over there.
Despite all the recriminations, there is still sadness at the end of an era. Sarah and Diana are mothers to the Queen's grandchildren. Once a royal, always a royal will probably be their motto. Today, their shared experience binds them together.
The Princess and the Duchess are each other's best friends and chief confidants. No one else can understand exactly what they've been through. They're in a unique position. They've both been Windsor wives and have chosen to walk out of the court life. And they've shared so much together that has bound them together in a very special way. They're like sisters. It's a very special relationship, but they don't flaunt it in public because they're worried that it might lead to allegations that they're ganging up and plotting against the House of Windsor, which is, of course, all nonsense. All they're trying to do is survive and have a happy life.
With the divorce finalised, Diana seems determined to take control of her life.
During the negotiations over the divorce, she wanted to keep a bit of a low profile. You notice she didn't do too many official engagements at home in Britain. She kept her head down relatively. But now she's got plans to get out and about and do a lot more. The divorce has given her a certain freedom. The princess has now taken over running her own office. She's running her own life. She's more independent and she's more in charge, and she's relishing it all. She's loving it. So I think we'll see a busier princess, more involved, and therefore constantly in the headlines.
With an estimated £17 million divorce settlement from Charles, there's little doubt that she'll still be able to enjoy the good life. Kings and queens must have their crowns, and the British monarchy has some of the best. Familiar the world over, these priceless jewels are worn by monarchs, but belong to the state. But the Queen does have a vast personal jewellery collection, estimated to be worth in excess of £30 million. The glimpses we catch of it worn on grand public occasions are only the tip of the iceberg. Behind this private collection lie extraordinary tales of lottery winnings, extravagant gifts, and spectacular gems gleaned from a world empire over generations. The most magnificent set of jewels in the Queen's own collection are the Cambridge and Delhi Durbar emeralds, worth over £2 million. How the Duke of Cambridge and his wife, the Queen's great-great-grandmother, acquired 40 of these gems in 1818 was pure fluke.
They went to Frankfurt on a tour, and there was a lottery for a charity. And the Duchess of Cambridge decided that, yes, she would buy some tickets, and actually won, and was presented with this brown box full of these emeralds. And then subsequently they were made up into various parures, various pieces of jewellery. One most famous piece is the one that the Princess of Wales wore around as a headband when in Australia. I believe it was done that way, originally intended to wear around the neck, but because of sunburn it was decided that it would be easy to put it around the top.
In 1897, the Cambridge emeralds were inherited by the Queen's great-uncle, Prince Francis of Teck.
He was a real ne'er-do-well. He was a great gambler, you know, he had a bit of this Irish blarney in him, and he showered jewels on his mistress, and Queen Mary, his sister, wasn't having any of that. He died rather suddenly, and she was horrified to find that the Cambridge emeralds, the family emeralds, had been given to his Irish mistress. Off she went, can't you just imagine, her tiara on her head, the grand Queen Mary, and she got those emeralds back. And I often think of it when I see the Queen wearing them today, that those jewels have been around a bit.
I'm sure that it will come, and that South Africa...
In 1911, King George V and Queen Mary were crowned as India's Emperor and Empress at the famous Delhi Durbar.
Can you imagine one of those Indian celebrations when people arrive in elephants on howdahs? When I say people, I mean Maharaja kind of people. And when there's somebody fanning you from behind on this hot day and you're sitting under some extraordinary throne, probably the throne itself is studded with jewels. This is what Queen Mary and King George V went through at the beginning of their reign, when India was the most important part of the future Commonwealth. And the Maharajas came up to them carrying these incredible jewels as presents. Queen Mary received emeralds in her own right from the Indian people, and she had those made up into fantastic jewels. She mixed them with the Cambridge emeralds to make different parure. And now, of course, Diana was given one of the emerald sets, and Prince Charles bought her an Art Deco emerald and diamond bracelet to go with it. Like so much he didn't know about his young wife, he didn't know she didn't like emeralds.
For a visit to Rome in 1980, the Queen wore a favourite diamond and pearl tiara from her personal collection. Again, she'd inherited this from her grandmother Queen Mary, the great architect of the Windsor family jewels. She'd bought this magnificent piece from the daughter of the Grand Duchess Vladimir of Russia, Tsar Nicholas's aunt, who'd had to flee the Bolsheviks. The Russian Revolution helped fuel Queen Mary's obsession with acquiring jewels.
When the Russian royal family was deposed, they basically had very little money left and they had to sell their jewels. And Queen Mary was able to pick up quite a lot of the Russian family jewels. She paid about £2 million in modern-day prices.
Members of the Russian royal family who were down on their luck and had nothing but their jewels to support themselves sort of sold them privately. They weren't very practical people. The Grand Duchess Olga, she was a woman who'd never had to deal with money. And of course it seems like a godsend when Queen Mary comes along saying, let me sort it out for you. I know this jeweller, and of course I'd love to have them. And she took the pick of the Russian jewels. Whether she ever paid for them in full at the proper price is very doubtful, although I think a lot was given in kind to these exiled Russian relatives. They had grace and favour homes rather as some of the minor royals do today, so perhaps there was a trade-off there. But in real jewellery terms, Queen Mary did not pay the full whack.
In 1995, the Queen's official visit to Russia posed the very delicate problem of what jewels she should wear, if any. How awkward that she was scheduled to visit the tombs of her royal cousins, the Tsars, for the first time, when thanks to her grandmother, Queen Mary, she had the pick of their best jewels at home in a vault. Her Russian trip included visits to Moscow and to a gala performance at the Bolshoi Ballet. During this stopover, it was a deliberate choice to wear the sapphire and diamond parure that she'd received as a wedding present from her father, rather than choosing any of her inherited Russian jewels.
As the jewels had come from Russia under sort of slightly, perhaps, mysterious circumstances, the Queen didn't want to upset anybody, so she kept away completely from all the Russian jewels, and in fact wore the sapphire and diamonds at the Bolshoi Ballet. When I was actually there, the Bolshoi Theatre, when the Queen walked into the box, and it was a 10-minute standing ovation, and she could not believe that people were appreciating her in this way. She was absolutely overwhelmed. And I remember talking to her about it a week later, and she said, "You did not think I was overdressed?" And I said, "You know, it was absolutely wonderful. People loved you. It was terrific."
In 1936, the future of the British monarchy was threatened when the Queen's uncle, King Edward VIII, abdicated to marry the twice-divorced Wallis Simpson. This constitutional crisis also led to jewels that would normally have swelled the Windsor family collection being taken into exile. The flawless stone in Wallis's engagement ring was half of one of the greatest emeralds in the world and had once been worn by a Mughal emperor. The king had ordered the jeweller Cartier to make the ring, and as a regular customer was quoted as special price. £10,000 is the equivalent of $500,000 today. Throughout the marriage, he celebrated their relationship by giving his wife numerous jewels to create a magnificent collection.
Most of the jewels she had were either bought for her by the besotted future Duke of Windsor, or otherwise they were made up from jewels that he had been given in India, that is, raw stones. But they weren't actually jewels that, say, Queen Victoria had worn.
This was a collection to rival even the Queen's.
When the Duke of Windsor died, it went to the Duchess, and thereafter the bulk of it, as far as I understand, went to charity for AIDS research. They fetched a phenomenal price, something like 10 times more than was expected, because they'd been owned by the Duchess of Windsor, because there'd been all this royal romance connected to them.
One of Wallis's favourite jewels, her ruby necklace, fetched over £1.5 million from a mystery buyer at the Geneva auction in 1987, when the whole collection was sold for a total of £27 million. Known buyers included the dress designer Calvin Klein, who bought 4 items for over £870,000, Aaron Spelling, the producer of the television soap Dynasty, who purchased a necklace for his wife, and Elizabeth Taylor, who bought the Prince of Wales's diamond brooch for £350,000, now worth in the region of £1 million.
The Duchess of Windsor's jewels, of course, were sold up for charity. Now, that's something that I don't think we'll be seeing for other members of the royal family. But some pieces did manage to sneak their way back into the royal family. You know, Princess Michael of Kent, who befriended the Duchess before she died, I think maybe she felt a little bit of an outsider and therefore they had something in common. And she received as a gift a pair of panther earrings, those famous Cartier earrings. And she wears them very occasionally, but not, I would imagine, in front of the Queen.
After the loss of the Duke of Windsor's jewels, the Queen seemed very wary of risking any more dilution of the family collection, only giving Diana the Cambridge emeralds and the lover's bow knot tiara as wedding presents, which had belonged to Queen Mary and was a design she'd copied.
You know, Queen Mary had all these relatives strung out through Germany and Russia, and she used to go in the summer. It was called the Gathering of the Royal Mob. They used to kind of go on their summer holidays together, a very upmarket Butlins or Club Mediterranee with just members of the royal family. And then, of course, they all dressed for dinner in those days, tiaras, the whole bit. And Queen Mary then would have seen jewels that she loved. And the bow-knot tiara was something that she had copied by Garrard just before the First World War and the Russian Revolution, 1914, using jewels that, pearls especially, that she had been given as a wedding present, but had it made for herself, gave it to the Queen, who has hardly worn it, and then the Queen gave it to Princess Diana as the future Queen.
Garrard has been the crown jewellers since 1843. Here at their Regent Street workshops, high-quality gems are turned into jewellery worth hundreds of thousands of pounds. In 1888, Garrard created Queen Alexandra's Kokoshnik tiara, now in the Queen's private collection and encrusted with 488 diamonds. Many of the Queen's private pieces are kept in Garrard's vaults, and they have a running contract to alter or clean items as required. In 1981, Prince Charles paid Garrard just over £28,000 for Diana's engagement ring. But Garrard's main job is to maintain the state crown jewels. These include the King George IV's state diadem crown. In 1862, Queen Victoria is pictured wearing it on an early postage stamp.
George IV's coronation, the new crown was made, and he was under strict orders from Parliament what he could have in his crown. He then decided that he would have flower bouquets between the Maltese crosses. The flower bouquets represent England, Scotland and Ireland. He didn't actually wear it for his coronation because it was considered to be too feminine.
Queen Victoria had it set with diamonds and pearls from her collection, but the Hanoverian kings were hard up.
Originally, it would have been set with semi-precious stones that would have been hired from the jewellers for the coronation, because in those days they couldn't afford to have crowns and diadems set with real stones and keep them. So the jewellers came in and they were, all the jewels were hired and sent back afterwards. If the jewels were left in the crowns, the sovereign would have pawned them, hocked them to pay gambling debts or, as turned out, mistresses in those days.
Today, the Queen wears the diadem to go to the annual state opening of Parliament.
She wears it leaving Buckingham Palace, travelling in the coach to the House of Lords. She then walks up the grand staircase into the robing room where that crown, the diadem, is removed, and she then puts on the more important imperial state crown.
This is the most valuable state crown of all. It contains the world's second largest cut diamond, weighing 317 carats and worth between 80 and 100 million pounds. Altogether, it has 2,800 diamonds. The crown's total worth is incalculable. Every monarch has it altered to fit.
It's basically the head size. The crown would be altered. The imperial state crown, as I said, is the only one that's ever altered. That is altered to fit the head size. It's rather like a hat. It's rather like having a hat made. We often refer to these crowns as hats, like the same with diadems and tiaras. They are quite humorously referred to as hats, or part of the kit.
Queen Victoria preferred to wear a smaller, lighter crown that she had had made in 1870. This only weighs 4 ounces.
Queen Victoria suffered migraines in later life, and she found that the crown's far too heavy. That's why we at Garrard made the small, very, very small crown for her to wear. And she always wore it at the top of the head or at the back on the bun, with or without the arches. But the imperial state crown would have always been there as a symbol. Say the opening of Parliament or state occasions, it would have been there on a cushion by the side of her.
When Queen Elizabeth came to be crowned, changes had to be made for her too.
Imperial state crown was in fact altered by Garrard for the coronation in 1953. The head size was adjusted and the arches were made lower, mainly because to make it look more feminine and to reduce the weight slightly. Not forgetting this weighs 2.5 pounds.
For the annual state opening of Parliament, the Queen wears Queen Victoria's 28-diamond collet necklace and earrings. Victoria appropriately wore them for her Diamond Jubilee portrait in 1897, and they continue to be an established part of the crown jewels.
The diamond collet necklace that was made, Queen Victoria had made, along with the diamond drop earrings, these were made from diamonds that she took from a garter star and a ceremonial sword, and they were added to the royal collection, or the crown jewel collection, in 1901. The diamond drops that are on the earrings and the drop on the bottom of the collet necklace did actually come from the Timor ruby necklace. It was given to Queen Victoria in 1851 by the East India Company. They now form part of the crown jewels.
For the Queen's marriage to Prince Philip in 1947, she wore a tiara from the state collection, lent to her as something borrowed by the Queen Mother, who still acts as its royal custodian.
The tiara that Princess Elizabeth wore is known as the Hanoverian tiara, and it was in fact designed and made in 1830 for Queen Victoria. It was made of old diamonds from the time of George III, and it was creating this wonderful, quite spiky tiara, quite high, which can also be worn as a necklace, interestingly enough. The royal family are very, very, very good with their jewellery. They can be worn for lots of different things. Anyway, Queen Victoria had it made in 1830 and left it to the Crown, and Queen Mary wore it. There are pictures of Queen Mary wearing it. And then Princess Elizabeth wore it for her wedding because it was lent to her by her mother.
As far as the public knew, the day went exactly as planned. But behind the scenes, the bride's two main pieces of jewellery had both created anxious moments.
Because on Princess Elizabeth's wedding day, two unforeseen things occurred. One was that the beautiful Hanoverian tiara, diamond tiara, actually the frame broke, which is a nightmare situation for anybody. But of course, unlike anybody, she did in fact have the court jeweller standing by, but in his workshop. And he had to be sent for double swift to come and mend the thing. And I think she was very, very nervous and had to be reassured by her mother. And also, she wanted to wear the double row, the famous double row of pearls, which had been given to her by her parents, by her father, I think in particular, on her wedding day. And they were on display with the rest of the royal presents, which was extremely awkward. So in a London which was paralysed with traffic problems, her newly appointed private secretary, John Colville, was dispatched across London to get this priceless pearls and somehow get them back to Buckingham Palace. But he couldn't get back. Once he'd actually persuaded them to give him the pearls, I imagine sharp words were spoken, he had to commandeer one of the royal limousines belonging to King Haakon of Norway to somehow get through and give them to the bride-to-be.
On Princess Anne's wedding day in 1973, the Queen Mother again lent the Hanoverian fringe tiara. It had now been worn by 3 generations of royal Windsor brides. The Queen Mother's wedding present to Diana was a sapphire and diamond brooch which Diana subsequently had made into a pearl choker. In auction, this could sell for over £2 million. But Diana's most valuable wedding present is now worth in the region of £5 million.
think a jewel that everybody identifies with Diana because of those blue eyes of hers are the sapphires, and especially that socking great sapphire that she was given by a member of the Saudi royal family as a wedding present.
When Diana and Charles married in 1981, the tradition of having a public display of royal wedding presents was discontinued on the orders of the Queen. Royal jewels are now only ever seen when in use.
I'm sure this single-bar electric fire syndrome comes into play when it comes to displaying royal wedding gifts. We're supposed to believe that the Queen is a very thrifty, parsimonious person who doesn't really have very much money. And the same is true of the next generation.
Diana had to fight hard to get her divorce settlement from Charles. Perhaps she threatened to sell off some of her sapphires and diamonds, such as those given to her by the Sultan of Oman, worth £2 million. The Queen would hate such a breaking of ranks.
The Queen has always been concerned that the younger members of the royal family don't ever appear flash. We're a long way from a bicycling royal family, but it doesn't do really, does it, to show the incredibly beautiful jewels which are around in the royal family and which are given as presents. The only equivalent today of the Indian Maharajas who showered Queen Victoria and the future Edward VII with gifts, their equivalent today are these Saudi princes who are real, they have fiefdoms. They have the possibility to pop into Asprey or Garrard or have made up fantastic jewels, pay for them, and give them to the Queen or to Princess Diana, who's had them.
Unlike many of her royal predecessors, Diana isn't obsessed by expensive jewellery.
Diana doesn't wear many jewels. She really likes the fun of jewellery, and to her that means fashion jewellery, costume jewellery, much more than the real thing. And she doesn't really wear those long necklaces that sort of just hang there and fill in the neck of a dress. It's not her style at all. Look at the way, very funny and amusing way, she's hung pearls, false pearls, down the back of a low-back dress. That's the kind of thing she likes. And you know, she would have had a soulmate in Queen Alexandra, who herself, can you believe, in spite of her great collection of jewels, had false pearls and a lot of false stones to make amusing things for herself. And there's a funny story about how, when she was riding one of those coaches, her pearl choker suddenly split, and the courtiers in panic scrabbled and tried to pick up every single pearl that was rolling away. Queen Alexandra sat there very serenely, as well she might have done, because they were all fakes.
When it came to the marriage of Prince Andrew to Sarah Ferguson, the Queen again held back on lavishing family heirlooms on an outsider.
I often think about the wisdom of the Queen as a mother and a grandmother and a head of the family. It always puzzled me that Diana wasn't given more royal jewels. And certainly Sarah, the Duchess of York, got nothing. I mean, she got pieces that were bought at Garrard's.
Sarah's order from Garrard still cost £60,000. While the precious family jewels remained in the palace vaults, this suite of diamond clusters was newly acquired for Sarah.
She didn't give them because she suspected right from the start, maybe, that these marriages were going to be difficult, and the jewels perhaps were held back to be given for 10th wedding anniversaries or 20th or 25th wedding anniversaries, and those girls haven't reached them, have they?
Like her grandmother, Queen Mary, the present Queen takes the safeguarding of family heirlooms very seriously.
I'm sure the Queen feels that her jewels, like her art treasures, are something that she is the guardian of while she is Queen, but they will be passed to Prince Charles. Sadly, it seems as though he may not have a wife to wear them, which is very interesting because it means that those jewels might, in the end, the ones that the Queen is wearing now, kind of be cobwebbed, mothballed for 100 years like a Sleeping Beauty's, and then emerge in yet another generation, perhaps for Prince William's future bride.
It must be a comforting thought to know that if hard times ever hit the Windsors like the Russian Romanovs, there'll always be the family jewels to fall back on.